In December 2021, a small game called Vampire Survivors launches on Steam at $2.99. Basically using only asset store sprites, bare-bone graphics with no marketing push and no big coverage at all. 6 weeks later, a famous streamer picks it up, and by February, it's pulling 70,000 concurrent players on Steam. And by summer, it is the most talked indie game on the platform. Then, the developer does something that nobody expects. He raises the price. A month later, the full version launches at the new price and sells 2 million copies in 30 days. And the reason Luca Galante raised the price right before the biggest sale window of his life is the same reason the $4.99 launch price you are planning right now is about to bury your game before anyone ever sees it. Most developers see those Vampire Survivor numbers and pull the wrong lesson. They think the cheap price made a success. Well, it didn't. The success happened despite the cheap price, and the developer knew it. That's why he raised it before scaling. The devs who copy his original price aren't getting the same virality. They are simply getting the cheap price. 62% of non-free indie games on Steam right now sell under $10, and most of them are invisible. Today, we'll go through how Steam actually reads your price as an algorithm signal and the 5 pricing mistakes quietly killing indie launches right now, followed by a 6-question framework for setting a price that works. And the one thing you can do months before you pick a number that makes every other decision in this video easier. Let's go! Okay guys, just one thing before we get into it. Is this a kind of breakdown videos you are looking for? If yes, please subscribe to the channel, it helps us reach more developers like you. And let us know in the comments which topics we should cover next. Thank you so much, and let's move on with the video. Okay everyone, before we move on with the mistakes, let me give you one clarification. Everything in this episode applies to paid games. Free-to-play games is a different model with different algorithm rules. Steam doesn't measure free-to-play success through revenue velocity. It measures through concurrent users, session length, and retention. If you are building a genuine free-to-play game, that's a valid strategy, but it is a different conversation. We are here talking about the developer who has a paid game and prices it at $2.99 or $4.99 because it feels accessible, but then watches their launch flatline because of the decision they made before they ever hit publish. The visibility surfaces that matter. New and trending, popular new releases, they're recommended for your carousel. These systems are not driven by unit sales. They are driven by revenue, specifically revenue velocity, which means how fast money moves through your page in a short window after launch. Valve earns 30% of every transaction on its platform for most developers, and that creates a direct structural incentive to surface games generating more revenue per sale, not just more sales. And the algorithm reflects that. At $4.99, you need almost 3 times the sales volume of a $14.99 game to generate the same revenue signal. In your first 48 hours, the window when Steam is deciding whether to put your game into new and trending or move on to the next release, you are at a structural disadvantage with every dollar you left on the table. According to Game Discovery Co.'s analysis of Steam pricing from February 2023 to October 2025, the median price of games on Steam dropped 20%, from $19.50 to $15.64. That shift was driven largely by a handful of viral outliers. Buckshot Roulette at $2.99, Content Warning, which gave away 6 million free copies in the first 24 hours before going to $7.99. Games that spread at a velocity no pricing decision manufactured. Most developers who looked at those launches and repriced it to match didn't get the virality. They just got the cheap price. Well, that's the market you are entering. Now here's the part most pricing advices skips. Your launch price is a follow-up decision of a more fundamental question. do you actually have a real audience ready to buy your game on day one? Because pricing without an audience just means you have fine-tuned the volume on a song nobody is listening to. So hold that thought, we'll get back to it. As of 2022, 62% of non-free indie games on Steam were sold under $10. And I don't think that's a strategic clustering. I believe it's more where games go when developers default to safe instead of making a real pricing decision. Chris Zukowski at How to Market a Game ran the historical numbers using VJ Insights data. In 2006, indie games on Steam averaged $5.20. By 2022, after 16 years, that average had risen to $7.20. In the same period, AAA games reached an average of $33 on Steam by 2022, a roughly 400% increase over the preceding decade. Indie devs held prices flat inflation-adjusted terms for a decade and a half while every other part of the market moved. The result is that under $5 has become the most crowded, lowest signal tier on Steam. Asset flips, shovelware, games that went live for a few $100 and were never touched again. Steam's algorithm doesn't have the quality filter at that price point. It grouped names by revenue behavior and so on. At $2.99, revenue behavior looks identical to the bottom of the market, even if your game looks 2 times better than the games there. Players use price as a filter before they read a word of your description. A $14.99 game earns a different level of attention than a $2.99 one. They look at the screenshots more carefully, they read the reviews more seriously, and they consider whether this is something worth their time. That attention is what you need on your page. Cheap prices attract impulse behavior. Impulse buyers don't finish games, don't leave reviews, and don't become part of your community. There's a set of rules in the Steamworks documentation that most developers don't read carefully until they need it and it's already too late. Steam's launch discounts are capped at 40%. You can configure the duration between 7 to 14 days. And after your launch discount ends, there is a 30-day cooldown before you can run any additional discount. And to participate in major Steam seasonal sales, your game cannot be in its 30-day post-release window. If it is ineligible for the sale. If that window happens to end during an active seasonal sale, you can still join mid-sale, but you already missed the opening days. Here's why that matters for pricing. If you launch a game at $14.99 with a 40% launch discount, you are at $8.99. That's a real price drop. Players who were hesitating have a reason to act. The discount has weight. Well, if you launch a game at $4.99 with a 40% launch discount, you are at $2.99. That is not an event, and nobody sends their friends a message about the game being $2.99 instead of $4.99. Then the 30-day cooldown kicks in, you wait, and when you finally run your next sale, your deal pricing at $4.99 base is a number that generates no urgency whatsoever. Your launch price is not just about day one revenue. It's the anchor for every future discount reference. Build it in a range where your sales can actually create momentum. Steam reviews are not just a social proof. They are an algorithm input. A game with 12 reviews is treated differently by Steam's system than a game with 500 reviews. The amazing, overwhelming positive status requires both at least 90% positive reviews and at least 500 reviews. Until you clear those thresholds, your review score is a fragile ratio that can shift with a handful of responses in either direction. Here's where pricing connects. Players who spend more on a game are more likely to engage with it deeply enough to leave a review. The mechanism is straightforward. A $14.99 purchase carries a level of investment that a $1.99 impulse buy doesn't. When you spend real money on something, you form an opinion about it. You play along enough to have something to say. The impulse buyer who spends $2 plays for 20 minutes and uninstalls. The $12.99 buyer who waited the decision is more likely to finish, more likely to care, and more likely to tell Steam what they thought. When fewer buyers review your game per unit sold, you need more unit sales to hit the thresholds that improve your algorithm placement. And those unit sales are harder to come by when you are invisible. It compounds in one direction. Most developers who underprice have a reason they believe in. They want their game to be accessible to everyone. They don't want the price to be the reason someone doesn't get to play it. That's the real intention. It's also not what cheap pricing accomplishes. A $4.99 base price doesn't expand your audience to players who genuinely can't afford games. It just slightly discounts the players who will have bought at $12.99 anyway. Players who cannot afford games are not choosing between $4.99 and $12.99. They are wishlisting games and waiting for sales. And they are using free demos. They are playing other free alternatives as well. Steam has actual tools for real accessibility. Regional pricing adjusts your price automatically per market. A game at $14.99 in the US can be $3.50 in a lower income market without touching your global positioning. And a free demo lets any player try your game without spending anything. A free demo is also your single best pre-launch growth lever. It's the answer to the problem I flagged at the start of the video. Pricing without an audience is the volume knob on an empty room, and the demo is how you start filling that room. The problem is that most demos solely sit on a Steam page. Get downloaded once, play it for 10-15 minutes, and then they are forgotten. Chris Zukowski's analysis of Steam's Next Fest on June 2024 found that on average, only 20% of demo players go on to wishlist the game. And the median game earned 618 wishlists. That's a useful number, but what's most important it is the 80% of your demo players that walked away without any commitment. And the standard Steam demo has no mechanism to bring them back. This is where QUDO becomes useful as a platform on its own. The first thing you can do is list your demo on QUDO alongside Steam. QUDO has an active community of players who use the platform specifically to discover indie games. That community is an audience your Steam page on its own doesn't reach. Listing your demo there is free distribution to players who are already looking for games to engage with. If you want to go further, integrate the QUDO SDK into your demo. Under 30 minutes for any Unity game. Once it's in, players get QUDO credits while they play extra for reaching specific moments in your game. A checkpoint, a score, a sequence completed, whatever you want. The credits are unlocked to your game. They sit on players' QUDO account and they work across every other game integrated with QUDO and on the QUDO ecosystem itself. So a player who found your demo on the platform has a concrete reason to keep playing. That's the difference between a passive demo and one that does real work. A passive demo gets a download count. An active demo with visibility and a reason to stay engaged gets your day one buyers. And it does that regardless of what price you eventually set. We started this episode with Vampire Survivors because every conversation about indie pricing eventually gets there. Now let's finish the story and pull the actual lesson out of it. Luca Galante talked about the $2.99 launch price in interviews and in a no-clip documentary. He described it that it wasn't priced in a smart way, it was priced in a fair way. Because at launch, Vampire Survivors was bare bones, built on asset store sprites and incomplete by his own description. The $2.99 price was meant to reflect what the product actually was at the moment, not an expression of underconfidence about its potential. An honest signal about its state, basically. The price then rose to $4.99 in September 2022 as content was added, which is the moment the developer himself stopped pretending the bare-bones framing still applied. The game spread because of TikTok and streamers. because it hit a moment of cultural hype that no pricing strategy can manufacture. Game Discovery Co. looked directly at the 2024 low-price viral hits and was explicit. Those games succeeded because of extraordinary word-of-mouth velocity, not because of what they charge. The median price on Steam dropped 20% as developers looked at those outliers and adjust to match them. And the learning here is simple. Price your game based on what a well-made, competently marked title with a real audience can support, not on what a generational exception achieved despite its pricing. Okay, let's get to it. 6 questions to answer before you set your launch price. Work through all of them today. Number 1. What is the comparable range in your genre? Open SteamDB and find 5 to 10 games your target player would also consider. Look at their current price, their launch price, and their discount history. You are not trying to copy those numbers. You are understanding what your player's reference frame is when they land on your page. That frame determines how your price reads before they read anything else. Number 2. What is the minimum viable price to run meaningful discounts? If you want a 50% off sale to generate real urgency, work backwards. A sale price of $7.49 requires a full price of $14.99. Decide on the sale price that creates momentum, then set your full price to make that possible. Number 3. Does your genre hold premium pricing? Game Discovery Co. identifies a barbell structure in the current Steam market. A cluster of games priced between $5 to $10 and another cluster priced between $60 to $70 for major releases, with relatively few games priced between $25 and $55 as their default. The difficult zone for a new IP without pedigree is that middle band. Deep strategy games and survival crafters hold that high end of indie pricing better than 2D platformers and puzzle games. Know where your genre sits. Number 4. Have you set up regional pricing? Steam's regional pricing tool adjusts your price per market based on the ratio to your US dollar price. If accessibility in lower income markets is a genuine concern, this is the answer. Set it up before launch, not after. Number 5. Where is your demo going to live and what reason does a player have to come back to it? A demo that gets unloaded, played for 10 minutes and forgotten is the missed day one audience. Decide where you're going to distribute the demo, how you're going to give players a reason to return, and what your community actually looks like by launch day. As covered earlier, listing on QUDO and using the SDK is one practical way to handle both halves of that. Whether route you take, build the answer in before you finalize your price. Number 6. What is your launch discount plan? Steam caps discounts at 40%, configurable from 7 to 14 days. After that, a 30-day cooldown before your next discount. Decide your launch discount percentage before you finalize your base price. The launch discount is your first sale event. Make sure it lands as one. None of the questions I just listed takes over an hour, but most developers skip straight to the number without working through any of it. The single highest leverage move you can make on your pricing strategy isn't a number. It's making sure that by the time you hit publish, you have a community of players who already know your game, have already played it and have a reason to buy it on day one. Everything else in this video gets easier when that's true, and nothing in this video saves you if it isn't. If you are into indie games as a gamer or as a game developer, don't forget to check out QUDO's platform. And last question for the comments. Does your current launch plan include a free demo? And if it does, where does it live and what brings players back to it? Drop it below, the answer is going to shape what I cover next. See you in the next Growth Clinic.